Hello and welcome to NARC Live on Wednesday the 29th of September 2021, coming to you from Norfolk on the east coast of England with Tammy M0TC.
Hello.
And me, David G0KYA. Good to see you. On tonight's show, find out how to make your own end-fed long wire antenna with Steve G0KYA. Your news, including pictures of those bird's eye fish wagons from last week. And these are in Great Yarmouth. And we find out, what on earth is this? Quite a few entries. Some people may have got it right. Some people certainly haven't got it right. If you think you know and you haven't had a chance to enter yet, then pop it on BATC or Facebook and we'll read out your entry in 10 minutes or so when we get around to that part of the programme. But first, your news. And Nigel 2E0NLK has told us that next Saturday, the 9th of October, he's doing a special fundraising event. And we've got some images here, I think, Tammy, if we could just show this. This is called Combat to Coffee. And it's a charity game. It's being run at battle stations at Snetterton. And it's all to raise money to help veterans with PTSD and other injuries back to work. And donations can be sent to Battle Station at Snetterton if you want to support Nigel, and other people will be doing it. Looks like lots of fun as well for those. Now, one of the things that we're looking for is someone who could possibly video it. Although there's generally not spectators there because of safety, we do want someone to try and video it. It's something normally that Tammy and I would do, but we can't because we'll be doing the live RSGB convention on that very day, unfortunately. So if you have a video camera or even just a good smartphone with a camera and you'd like to be involved and have a look at this, and you could take a film for Nigel and for us, for NARC Live, we would love you to help us. Drop us an email to the usual address and we'll all get in touch with each other and see what we can do. It'll be good to support him on that. By the way, if you're seeing that and you think, well, that looks fun, I'd like to take part and to raise some money for charity as well, you can do. It costs you £45 for the day, but that includes all of the kit that you need to wear. It includes a barbecue and a raffle ticket, and it starts at 8 o'clock in the morning. But otherwise, generally there's no spectators. But if you film it for us, you get in.
Yeah.
So it's a good opportunity, and very good luck, Nigel, for that. We'll mention it again next week on NARC Live, but we say meantime, we're just trying to find someone who's got a good smartphone or a video camera who could film that for us, because that would be wonderful to see. Now next, we've had a quiet summer. It has been summer. And normally in the winter time, in the darker nights and everything, it's a good time to brush up on that Morse, or maybe even start it for the first time. Well, Roger G0KYA has sent me details of all of the new Morse classes that start actually this Friday on October the 1st. And this is the schedule. Now there's a lot more detail actually on our website on norfolkamateurradio.org, but just as a quick look down there, there's something there for everybody. For raw beginners, if you look on Friday, so if you've thought, I might get around to Morse, but I have no idea how to do anything. If you look on Friday at the bottom there, at 8 o'clock, between 8 and 9, there's a very raw beginners class with Phil G4LPP, and he's gentle on people, I know, and beginners. So if you've never done it before, that'd be a good place to start. And if you're at various other levels, and including, look, they're doing a sending practice on Zoom there, so you can actually see and talk to people as well on Thursday. So look, nearly every night of the week, apart from Wednesdays, of course, you could do something with Morse in the daytime or in the evening. So we hope you'll support all those guys who are teaching there. We've got Chris, Jim, Roger, of course, Malcolm and Phil. So there's a lot of people there showing how to do the art of Morse. So full details on our website, and also we'll be on the newsletter this weekend. Now, you may have watched last week's programme, hopefully you did, and you saw those wonderful pictures that we all brought up. Well, one of the pictures that I showed, which is a picture of some loose couple freight at Weybourne Station in the North Norfolk Road, just happened to be a favourite memory of mine, and it was showing you a bird's eye wagon that I just happened to remember having as a toy as a kid on my dad's model railway. Well, this inspired John 2E0TWQ to get in touch because it brought back memories for him too. Tammy, can we have a look at some of these pictures? Now here's some wonderful pictures. Now that, I'm sure a lot of you know, most of you know, if you're in Norfolk, Great Yarmouth, you can picture it down there. I can picture exactly where that is, or the quay on the left there, and that bridge, which is still pretty much there. But it also shows that railway line that used to be there. I know there's a Midland Bank or an HSBC bank on the right there, wasn't there? This is an advert for fish fingers as well, bottom right. Anyway, the big picture comes from disused-stations.org.uk. Thanks for them for letting us use this picture. And you can see, though, the key thing in there, for me anyway, is the train with all those bird's eye containers, which John said were full of fish. This is what he wrote. On seeing that bird's eye picture, I recalled a childhood memory at the age of about 10, 1960, he says. These are the containers coming from Birdseye, South Quay, along the riverside to Vauxhall Station. First used around about 1957-58. That's before my time, Tammy. I found something that's before my time. Aerial view of containers from Birdseye via Haven Bridge, heading south to Vauxhall Station. They're carrying products, and they produced fish fingers from these, which was first done at the Great Yarmouth factory. So I guess that's what's inside one of those things. That one's branded British Railways, but we can see the bird's eye boxes there, no mistake. And he also said they also carried herring from the fishing boats via bird's eye. It brought back fond memories for him, and I've sent you some pictures, and here they are. And there's some more of them. As you may be aware, I live on the coal yard of the former Beach Coast Coach, I think that must be Coasts actually, Beach Coast Railway Station, and he was only born across the road. Now look at that. There are those images. And Tammy, if you dare now, I know this is the first time you'll have seen this, if you could cut to this camera, I said I must get one of these, and I did. I had a look on that well-known auction site, eBay, and there we are. This is a model. It came with a set of 3, and when my wife found out the price, she said, "How much?" Didn't you? Can we just recreate that again?
No,
when I showed you that? No, okay then. But it is lovely to see these. These are individually painted. Let me just show you the detail there. Get that in focus, yeah. So, wonderful stuff. Thank you very much to John for sending us that, and almost justifying my purchase, I feel. No?
If you say so.
Okay, thanks. Wide shot now, please, Tammy.
Wide shot now?
I've got to get you involved. So you show you approve. Now, John G0MXN also saw all those pictures, the wonderful pictures that you sent us last week, and he says he sends this in case it's of interest. This was at the time of the last air show at Norwich Airport in the 1980s. I don't even remember that they had an air show at Norwich Airport, did you?
No.
The aircraft, well, obviously, yeah, all right then. The aircraft was at the time the last flying example of the anti-submarine aeroplane and was kept at the Aviation Museum near Carlisle. Not long after this, it crashed, and I don't think it was restored to flying condition. And he says this is his original photograph taken with 35mm film using an Olympus OM10 camera. But it's his copyright, and we're free to use it if we want. He just says maybe there are other people with pictures of aircraft and things taken by amateur photographers. Well, I'm sure there are, and obviously we'll probably do another photography special at some point in the future. So if you've got something like that, do keep it aside for us, or even send it to us if you like, and then at some point in the future, when we do another photography special, we'll do, because we had a lot of feedback on that, and over 100 pictures we had, which was fantastic, really.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. Now, finally, on the picture theme as well, just by chance, we're, like many of you, I'm sure, we've got a sort of family and friends picture groups and things on WhatsApp and stuff like that. We just happened to have these pictures sent to us by Kevin's fiancée, Kevin M0UGD, that is fiancée M7BE, and she sent this from about just over an hour ago from Cromer Pier. She's working there tonight, and look at that. What a wonderful picture. She just sent that from her phone, and then we've got others, haven't we, Tammy?
There's 4 pictures, actually, yeah.
Look at that. That looks fantastic, doesn't it? It's double rainbow. We talked about that a few weeks ago, didn't we?
We did.
Looking out to sea. So we thought we'd show you this. We wouldn't just normally share our snaps and things between you, but as it's only just over an hour ago, look at that. Okay. We just thought you'd like to see what Cromer looks like now. We're probably a bit darker by now.
Yep.
Anyway, thank you very much for letting us show that picture, Becky, and to all of you as well who've sent us news. Don't forget to do that every week. Send it to us by 3 o'clock on a Wednesday, and we'll try and fit it onto that night's programme. But the earlier you can send it, the better for us. And send it to radio@dcpmicro.com. That's the address at the bottom of your screen now. We love to get your news and stories. It helps to keep the club together. Now, every week at this sort of time, I hand over to Tammy for your little people. What have you got for us this week?
Little people this week is called Autumn Fireworks.
Oh, wow, that's good. You should save that for November.
Maybe.
What are they made of then?
They're like things that have fallen off trees.
Okay.
Just like dead petals and things.
Right.
That have come off. I thought that was quite
Really
cool. They
good,
look really
isn't
like
it?
fireworks, doesn't it? Especially
Yeah.
the sort of blurred ones in the background.
I wondered if it was those things you used to see made out of sort of rubber bands or something like
No,
that.
no, they're flowers.
Okay.
Cool, eh?
All right. Brilliant. Yes. I'm just reading some messages
just-
as well.
I
Sorry.
thought you just
I am looking,
distracted.
Tammy, but I'm also just looking at messages that people send us because we don't always have time to look at them, do we? Anyway, as I said, thank you very much for that, Tammy, as well. And thanks very much. Keep in touch, won't you, with your messages. Now we get back to our competition. And last week we showed you this picture and said, what on earth is this? Look at that. It's very electronic-y, so lots of you should have got that. And I think that must be an aerial thing on there, surely. Something like that. I'm just looking here on...
Could be wings.
But it could be wings, yeah. But it's got on a circuit board there, unmistakable circuit board. Let's just see what that says. Tony M0TDK says, what on earth is it? I think it may be an early model of a robotic angel. Yeah, I can see that. Okay. Gordon, now these are the ones that sent in by email. I don't know if there are any on Facebook.
I don't.
Tammy's going to have a quick look now. But Gordon G0KYA says, is it a radio sonde unit? David G3VSJ says, my guess is that that thing is a camera to hang under a kite or a balloon. Ben 2E0VFN says, my guess is it's electronics out of a weather balloon. Andy G0SUM says, is it a phase detector for DFing? Definitely can see that. For direction finding, that is. Kev M0KKM says, as for the latest object, well, it could be a present from heaven, but it looks like the inner workings of a radio sonde, the bit that hangs off a weather balloon and falls to earth when things go pop. Martin G3ZQU says, I think the device shown this week is the innards of a radio sonde used by the likes of Mr. Bacon to obtain meteorological information in the upper atmosphere. And Simon M0SIH says, the item shown on What on Earth Is This is a radio sonde. A radio sonde is a battery-powered telemetry instrument carried into the atmosphere, usually by a weather balloon, that measures various atmospheric parameters and transmits them by radio to a ground receiver. Jim G0KYA would be best suited to give more details. So that's what you've all said. By the way, the picture was sent to us by Paul G3VPT. And let's see, Tammy, what is this device?
Well, I put on the bottom weather station, but I'm
did
not
you?
sure. I think I got that wrong.
Well, I think
I should have looked at
I
the,
think that is actually the title that Paul sent, but I think a radio sonde is probably the most accurate thing. But as two of those people who guessed,
I'll just say that on Facebook, John 2E0TWQ said he thinks it looks like the Angel of the North.
Oh yes, I can see that too.
Yeah.
Slightly bigger than that though. Anyway, thank you for all your entries, of course, and to Paul G3VPT for sending us the picture. And of course, it wouldn't be right if I didn't ask the man himself, who two of those people quoted, Jim, to see exactly what it is. And this is what he wrote to me earlier this afternoon. He said it is a radio sonde, as Paul says. Can't remember the exact frequency, but think it's in the region of 400 megs. The balloons are usually filled with helium or hydrogen. They contain sensors that record temperature, humidity and pressure. And they're tracked by radar, and the wind speeds are inferred from the locational changes. The balloon expands as it rises and eventually bursts, typically when it's reached up to about 20 kilometres. The results of the measurements are plotted on thermodynamic graphs used by meteorologists to predict cloud development and many other parameters of showers or thunderstorms, as well as the vital upper wind patterns. They are an important tool for operational meteorology, and the data is fed into the mathematical models to give 3D input on the initial state of the atmosphere before the model advances forwards in time using equations to predict the state of the weather variables at some point in the future. And Jim goes on to say there is a steady increase in the number of sondes launched, mainly at 1100 Zulu and 2300 Zulu, with the data attributed to 1200 Zulu and 0000 Zulu from locations around the world. The peak 1600 sites that was around 1990, after which the use of satellites filled in many gaps and reduced the need for quite so many sites to be active, although there's still about 1,000, he says. That's quite a nice bit of electronic. I'm surprised you're not meant to send it back somewhere. I'm not suggesting that Paul has stolen that, but you think you get a little tag in it saying, please return me too, or something? Or maybe they're almost disposable, because I suppose once they've crashed to Earth, that's it. But it looks like a lovely bit of electronics there. You can see the sort of strip line antennas and inductors and things in there. Anyway, I think that's a great What on Earth Is This? Thank you again, Paul, for sending it, for Jim for his answer, and for all of you who entered. And most of you got it right as well. Well done. So let's see. Now this week, something different as we try and do. And remember, by the way, we do want your special What on Earth Is This? But anyway, let's have a look at what this week's What on Earth Is This? That's a strange looking object. What on earth is this? Or what on earth is this for, you could say. Have a good look. As you've got the side view and a top view there.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would have guessed it, but I accidentally saw the picture of it in use.
It is, yeah, it does take a bit of imagination. You need to look at it carefully, and you might be able to work it out from that, I think. It's certainly something I've never seen, though, before. But a pretty everyday object, sort of. I mustn't give any clues, though. I don't want to spoil the fun for you at home. So have a good look at that. Of course, this picture will be on our website in the next couple of days, and on this weekend's newsletter as well, and we'll also pop it on Facebook to have a look there. And if you know what that is, or you can work out what that is, this is one of those things that you really could, then send your answers to us here at radio@dcpmicro.com, again by the latest, please, next Wednesday at 3 o'clock. But once you realise what it is, why not just send it when you think of it? And then we'll tell you next week at this time on NARC Live exactly what that is. Okay, just time now to tell you what's happening at the club this coming week. And Sunday, as always, the GB Tourist News at 7 o'clock on repeat at GB3NB. On Monday, the 4th of October, it's our Monday Night Net at 7:30. This week with Ken M0KJW. At 8:30, it's the 80-metre CW Net. And next Wednesday, here on the 6th of October, we have that shy, elusive man, Paul Money, the astronomer extraordinaire, who's coming to tell us why are there no green stars. He's adapted his talks now for this sort of audience, for an online audience, but there are normally some stunning pictures. So if you can watch it on a bigger device than your phone or your tablet, if you can pop it on your television, often you can stream these to your television now. Actually, as I discovered just for the first time the other night, if you're into Apple and things, you've probably got things like an Apple TV and Android have similar machines, but I found that I could go straight from my phone to our television, which happens to be a Samsung, and it just said, do you want to send it to this? And it was something on my phone. I just said yes, without any other electronics or gadgetry at all. It sent it to our television. So if you do like pictures and things like that, I think this would be a good week to watch on your big screen, because there'll be some stunning photography there, and we'll find out from Paul why there are no green stars. That's happening next Wednesday night, 7:30 on NARC Live. And of course, just a reminder that this card, which we produced for the club, we will be happy to send to anybody who you think will be cheered by a card from the Norfolk Amateur Radio Club. Don't have to be radio amateurs, certainly don't have to be members of the club. And of course, any other news or anything else for the programme to this address, radio@dcpmicro.com, bottom of your screens now. And we look forward to hearing from you. So now on to our main event. And now those darker evenings are here, looking outside. Yeah, it's about dark now, a bit colder. And I think it's a good time to start thinking back to radio, back to maybe making things. Now, it's very difficult to make equipment and things that matches the sort of radios and transceivers and things you can buy nowadays. But one thing you can do is make antennas. And not only make any just antenna, which are normally big and made out of aluminium and stuff like that, but there's a perfect antenna that you can make, and I bet nearly every one of you could make one of these. And tonight, to tell us all about it, our old friend Steve G0KY is coming to tell us about the end-fed half-wave antenna. So hello, Steve.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. I realised when I was writing this that, in fact, I first gave a talk on end-fed half-wave antennas about 11 years ago now. That's when we made the kits up, if you remember, for monoband end-fed half-waves. And I thought the thing is now that the model has grown, if you like, and now you can get multi-band end-fed half-waves and trapped end-fed half-waves, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to just look at what's state of the art now and give some people hints and tips on making your own. And I think the great thing about end-fed half-waves is that you can make a monoband one, very high efficiency, or you can make a multi-band one. I mean, for example, as you'll see later, a 40-meter end-fed half-wave would be about 66 foot long, and will give you 40 meters, 20, 15, and 10. But make it 132 feet long with the same matchbox. Then you've got 80, 40, 30, 17, 15, and 10 meters. So you get an awful lot of different bands out of a single antenna, which is pretty good, I think. And they're not that hard to make. I think the good thing is that there's been an awful lot of people doing an awful lot of research in this now, so that we can actually virtually guarantee that you can make one and it will work out of the box. So I thought what we'd do first of all is just have a look at where do they come from? What's the history of the end-fed half-wave? You might be surprised by this. Why an end-fed half-wave? Why would you bother? Then we'll look at monoband end-fed half-wave verticals, which is where we started from 10 years ago. Then multi-band end-fed half-waves, trapped end-fed half-waves. Then we'll have some hints and tips as well to have a look at some of the things I've learned over the years that work and some things that don't work.
Yeah, and I don't want to interrupt the flow, but one thing I want to do before anybody at home thinks, oh, well, I'm not into making things, although we don't want to skip to that part of your talk, it is really something that most people can make, isn't it, Steve? If you've got a sort of a hand drill and a soldering iron to do some very basic stuff, and it's not expensive either. And I just like to keep those viewers now to say this really is something that pretty much everybody watching this now could be able to make.
Yeah, absolutely. Very easy to make indeed. I've got one here that was the latest one I made. Let's make sure you can just see that.
Yeah.
I mean, it is really just a toroid, some wire, and some connectors. The connectors that you have to put on, and the SO239. That's pretty standard radio stuff. The only clever bit is this toroid, and more specifically, how it's wired, which isn't tricky, but it makes it work.
And again, not wishing to spoil things for later, Steve, but I mean that you can make comfortably for about 20 quid or so, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
we'll have a look at that and where you can get the boxes from. We'll go into this later, but there's actually one source of boxes that's very, very cheap indeed, and very easy to get hold of, and that they don't crack in the winter, so it seems. So I have had a lot of these boxes crack with frost and whatever. But so let's move on anyway. So where did it come from? Well, believe it or not, we have to go back to 1909. It was first patented by Hans Begerow of Berlin as the Zepp antenna. It was a design that was made for the Zeppelin balloons so that they could trail a wire out the back of the Zeppelin balloon and end up as a half wave, but feed it with a 50 ohm feed. So you ended up with a half wave wire. There we go. And then you had a bit of ladder line here with a quarter wave tuning section there. But so 1909 was the first end-fed half wave, which surprised me. And also in 1927, it reappeared again as the Fuchs antenna. There we go. They say there's nothing new in radio, and that probably suggests that almost 100 years ago, these things were being made even then. But why a half wave, end-fed half wave? Why bother at all? Well, if we take a simple half wave antenna, such as this one on the diagram now, and we feed it in the middle, the current and the feed point in the middle is a high current, low voltage, low impedance feed point. Typically, you could feed that with 50 ohm coax and get a low SWR, maybe less than 1.5 to 1. But if we come and feed it at the other end, we've got a real problem now, because there is zero current flowing at the end of that wire. It's a high voltage point, a high impedance point. So if you want to connect that wire up in the middle and just feed it as a half wave, but feed it at the end, you need some method of transforming the high impedance at that point from around about 2,500 ohms down to 50 ohms. And you may say, well, why even bother? Why would you bother doing that? The simple reason, or two simple reasons, are: one, it's a lot easier to feed something at the end. If you have a fishing pole and you put a wire up, you just fix it at the bottom and you can feed it at the end. So that's one of the reasons. It makes a very, very simple antenna. And the other one is that by feeding at the end, you can make use of the harmonics of that half wave. And so it becomes a multi-band antenna. Now, if you have a half-wave dipole and you want to make it a multi-band antenna, generally it doesn't work too well. I mean, usually the 40-meter, 7 megs dipole, you can run it at 21 megs or 15 meters fairly successfully. The SWR goes up a little bit, so that gives you 2 bands. But with as I said, a 66-foot end-fed half-wave, you're going to get 40, 20, 15, and 10. So that's a 4-band version. And on 132 foot, you can get about 7 or 8 bands of it, as we'll see. So what we really need to do is just concentrate on the fact that we need to change or convert this impedance from a high impedance point at the end to a low impedance point. As I said, what is the impedance at the end of a half wave? Well, I said 2,500 ohms, somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 ohms. To be honest, it doesn't really matter, because if you're going to transform it down from 2,500, 3,000 ohms down to 50, whether you use a 49-to-1 ratio or 64-to-1, you'll end up in the ballpark figure. You'll end up below 1.5 SWR of 1.5 to 1. So it's really not that critical exactly the impedance is, and we'll find that we can build a transformer that will work equally well on all bands. So again, why? Well, let's have a look at ground-mounted broader wave verticals. I mean, they are quite popular. I have nothing against them whatsoever, but you do need an extensive ground plane to make them work. You have to put in the other half of the missing half wave, if you like. So on a ground-mounted quarter wave vertical, you can put a ground spike into the ground, connect it all up, and you'll have a low SWR, but it won't be very, very efficient. And you need to start adding radials. You need to add them at least quarter wavelength long. And ideally, you need at least maybe 16 or 32. And you keep adding radials until you find that the SWR doesn't change whatsoever. And then that's about as good as you're going to get. But commercially, with broadcast stations, they generally put down about 120. Now, I don't know about you, but 120 radials on the lawn doesn't really appeal. And it makes a mess, and it doesn't do the lawnmower much good when you run over them. Don't ask me how I know that. It's a long story. So that's one of the reasons. Now, other thing, some multi-band antenna designs are inefficient. So they use traps, or they use various methods to get more than one band out of an antenna. So with an end-fed half wave, you can get, as I said, 4, maybe 6 or 8 bands out of one antenna. And there are no traps in there. There's nothing going on, so you don't have any losses as such. We'll have a look at a trapped end-fed half wave later, and I'll show you some of the limitations of it anyway. Many people don't have enough space really for horizontal space, that is, for decent antennas. So verticals can work quite well. And so to get an HF dipole to work well, it has to be at least a wavelength above the ground, maybe half a wavelength, but at least half a wavelength or 1 wavelength above the ground, which is a bit of a limitation, to be honest. So this is why back in 2010, 2009, I designed the end-fed half-wave vertical, which worked quite well. This was the first kind of test of it, if you like, when I was, this is my old house actually, and we can see there is just a fishing pole that was used to support it. That's the little matching box that I made as a test. But the trick with this was it used a piece of coax as a capacitor. Now, I don't know if you know much about variable capacitors, but I mean, they can get expensive. If you want to get a variable capacitor that can handle high voltages, they work out quite expensive. But I twigged really that you could get a capacitor made out of coax. I mean, the cost was pence. And basically, if you just connected it up and then cut the capacitor, cut the coax until you got to the point where you've got the lowest SWR, that was it. You just sealed the box up and that was it. It would work on any band you wanted. So that was the theory of it. And I mean, we used the 20-meter end-fed half-wave GB0 CMS at Caister for International Marconi Day. And we haven't done it for the last couple of years due to COVID, but we will go back again. But I mean, we've worked Australia, US Virgin Islands, Canada, USA, and most of Europe with it. And it works very, very well indeed. And I test these over and over and over again with against other antennas. And generally, you find it's 1 or 2 S points up on anything else you can find. It takes about 10 minutes to put up, doesn't need an ATU, and the total cost is about £30. And plus you need some guidelines, but well, you can get those from Poundland for £1, so there's not exactly a lot of money. So, I mean, that's why I like it. I think it's a very, very simple antenna, very simple to make, very simple to build, and works a treat. So how does it work? Well, the monoband, and we're talking about monoband end-fed half-wave here, it's a parallel tuned circuit, which is a high impedance at the frequency to which it is tuned. Obviously, the frequency is going to be the one that you select. So in this case, we'll make it, say, 20 meters. So we need to convert that 2,500 ohms down to 50 ohms. And this is the circuit we use. So you can see there that there's just a small circuit there with a capacitor. And this is why we were using the RG58 coax, which has a capacitance of about 28 picofarads per foot. So as long as you know roughly what sort of value capacitor you need, you cut the coax to do the job. And as I said, once you've fitted it into the box, it's all tuned up, close the box, and that's it, that's done. Steve, AA5TB in Texas, actually kind of started me off on this. It's one of his designs here. And this was the design that kind of got me going, really, with how does it work. And you'll just notice there's a couple of things there as well. You've got the capacitor across the secondary, obviously there. I just chose to use a piece of coax instead. And he put a link in between the secondary and the primary, that red wire that you can see there. And this helps to use the coax outer as a kind of a counterpoise to it. Now, why would you do that? Well, what we found is that there are minimal currents on the outside of the coax, minimal common mode currents, if you like, but there are some currents there. But by linking this across here, you're actually using the coax outer as a counterpoise. And as long as that coax is laying on the ground, that kind of earths it. So didn't have any RF problems, at the rig end, but it did help the matching an awful lot. But it's a little trick with the monoband ones that if you put a link wire across the secondary and the primary like that, it will work a lot better for you. Excuse me. So what do you need to make one? Well, you need a half-wave length of wire, using the formula I put there. So for 20-meter antenna, it comes out at pretty much 10.05 meters. So 10.05 meter piece of wire, vertical wire, it goes up the pole. And obviously you can get fishing poles off eBay for £20 or less, or I got mine from Sandpiper, but basically a 10-meter fishing pole to support the wire. Now you need the tricks at the bottom. Now, back in the 2010, I said that you needed a T200-2 red toroid, which would cost about £5 from jabdog.com. But I've since found out that, in fact, probably you're better off, in most cases, for a T200-6, a yellow toroid, which works better from 3 megahertz to 40 megahertz. To be honest, I've never had a problem with using the red toroid on 20 meters or higher, for that matter. But in the grand scheme of thing, if you're going to make one of these and you're going to buy the right parts, go for a T200-6 yellow, toroid. That's an iron powder toroid, not a ferrite toroid. But don't forget, we're building a monoband end-fed half-wave here. So these are the toroids I recommend for building a monoband one. Basically, you're building a tuned circuit for the frequency of operation. So if we're building a 20-meter end-fed half-wave, we've got to build a circuit that resonates at 20 meters. Therefore, the yellow toroid is a little bit more, it's optimum, if you like, at 20 meters or 14 megahertz than the red one. But as I said, if you've still got some red toroids around, they will still work for you. So there we go. There are the two toroid types that we recommended. People get confused about toroids. These are T200-2 and T200-6. The T200 means what is it in inches? So T200 means it's 2 inches in diameter. So a T240 would be 2.4 inches, and a T140 would be 1.4 inches in diameter. So that's the first part of the toroid designation, tells you the diameter of the toroid. And generally, the bigger the toroid, the better its power handling. So if you're building something that you want to run maybe 100 watts into, a T200, or in this case, T200-2 and T200-6 would be more than enough for 100 watts. If you go down to a smaller toroid, like a T140 or something, 1.4 inches in diameter, the power handling isn't quite so good. And also you may find that it hasn't got quite the inductance that you need for the lower band. So I've built end-fed half waves with T140 toroids, and they will work, but the performance on 80 meters isn't quite as good. So unless you are desperate to make a tiny matching box, I would always go for a T200. That then gives you a box of tricks that will match up to 100 watts, no problem whatsoever. And it will give you the performance that you need at 3.5 megs as well. So the instructions there are, wind 13 turns of enamel copper wire on the toroid. That's your secondary winding. And across this, connect a capacitor. In our case, a coax capacitor. Connect one side of the secondary to the antenna and the other to earth. Wind 2 turns as the primary and connect to the SO239. That's all there is to it, and away you go. So this is one of the first ones I built as a test, really. You can see how bodged it was with the chocolate block connectors and a bit of coax hanging off it. But having done all the calculations as to what was required and built it, I was amazed when I connected it up and found that I was getting a 1.2 to 1 SWR. And that worked really, really well. This is at the point where we had sunspots, by the way, so could work plenty on 10 meters, and it will come around again. But right now, it's probably not necessarily the best antenna to build for this particular month. Maybe next year may be better, but you might be better off building a 20-meter one than a 10-meter one, at least until the sporadic E season starts again, or we get some sunspots. So these are some lengths that you need. So we worked out that your half wavelength of wire is on the right-hand side there. So if you haven't worked out what you need, this will tell you. And the starting capacitor length, coax capacitor length, is the middle column. And what I said was that this is the starting point with it, and then you need to cut this down to tune it. Usually you'll probably end up taking off 1 to 2 inches off this to get the SWR down to where you need it, in the band. And depends what you want to do. Do you want to work CW, in which case you would place the lowest SWR point right at the bottom of the band? Or do you want an antenna that will work anywhere? So you might tune it, as I said here. These are the measurements for the middle of the band. Or, is there a particular frequency that you're only going to use nearly all the time, like maybe the FT8 frequency or something? So you can tune this by cutting the coax to give you a very, very efficient monoband end-fed half-wave antenna. So this is really what we were saying, or I was saying 10 years ago, but it still stands. And other than changing the toroid type, I don't think there's much changed since then. So that's the finished little box of tricks. And that's a tuning box. I've got tuning boxes in the cupboard now for, about 6 or 7 different bands. So if you're going somewhere, you're going to be on 20 meters. I just picked the 20 meter one. I've got a separate box with a 20 meter antenna in, and connect it up as we did at West Runton the other week. This is what I used, and once they're sealed up, they don't break, they don't overheat, they don't do anything. This could easily take 100 watts, not a problem at all. It wouldn't take much more than 100 watts, maybe getting up for 150 watts, probably. Much more than 200, it'll start to overheat. And the only way you can get around that is by having multiple toroids to give it a bit of a chance to survive, really. I did some tests, actually, for RSGB, and we were trying to find a commercial end-fed half-wave antenna that could easily take 400 watts. And I didn't find a single one with a single toroid that could take that kind of power. You need to have multiple toroids to do it. My antenna's 1 kilowatt version has two, I think or FT240 toroids in it, and that kind of struggles at about a kilowatt, to be honest. What happens is as you key down, what you'll notice is the SWR starts to change as the thing heats up, and it can go off the scale, actually.
What is heating up, Steve? Is it or overheating? Is it the wire that's wrapped around the toroid?
Well, it's the flux in the toroid core that just heats it up. And it's a bit like an induction hob, really, and it gets to the point where you get beyond the Curie point of the toroid, and it will start just playing silly devils. It just won't work until it cools down again. So all I'm really saying is that if you want to run a lot of power, you're going to need to use multiple toroids, but a T200 or thereabouts, T200, T240 will easily take 100 watts. But if you start to see rapid changes in SWR as you key down, that's probably a sign that the thing is overheating and the toroid's getting hot, and its characteristics change dramatically. So that was monoband end-fed half waves. And for a long time, I was happy with that. And I often wondered, well, how could we make a multi-band version? And it kind of eluded me. So didn't worry about that. But there was other work going on. I mean, a group of Dutch radio hams, Danny Horvath, E73M, Steve Ellington, and others, were all experimenting with different toroid types to see whether they could come up with a toroid that could actually work as a 49-to-1 or 64-to-1 transformer across a wider range. So instead of now having a monoband end-fed half wave, you could have a multi-band version. And so, as I said there, if you have a 49-to-1 transformer, that will transform your 2,450 ohms down to 50 ohms. And if we could do that, then a 66-foot length of wire, which is a half wave length on 40 meters, would work on 40, 20, 15, and 10. And a 132-foot length of wire would give you 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10. And in fact, if you're lucky, you get a low SWR on 60 meters, 30 meters, and 12 meters as well. I'll show you that later on a plot. So it means that you can actually build a single antenna, 132-foot long antenna perhaps, and even without an ATU, you're going to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8 bands out of a single antenna, which is unheard of, to be honest. And if you haven't got the space for 132-foot end-fed half wave, the 66-foot one will give you 4 bands to play with, and with an ATU, you can use it on other bands as well. So I think it's probably the simplest and, well, not cheapest, but one of the simplest antennas to give you multi-band operation in a simple back garden. And I've played with 66-foot ones. I've played with 132-foot. In fact, I've got a 132-foot commercial one up in the back garden now. And it astonishes me that I get a low SWR just about everywhere. You name it, it will work there, which is a much, much better way of doing it than playing with end-fed wires that go into an ATU at the back of the rig or whatever. I don't get any RF problems because it's being fed actually sort of 30 feet down the garden. That's where the matching box is. And by choking the coax, I don't get any RF coming back. So that's why I love them. They are very, very simple. They're kind of a fit and forget antenna, but they work on awfully well, on a number of different bands. So what's the difference between a monoband and a multi-band end-fed half-wave? Well, we have to forget about using iron powder toroids, and now we have to go to ferrite toroids to give us this multi-band capability. And generally, we use an FT240-43 or an FT140-43. They're the kind of preferred toroid types, beg your pardon. For QRP use on 40 to 10, an FT140 is fine, but for optimum use, I would go with a bigger toroid. In fact, Steve Ellington is saying that FT240-52, 3 of those glued together is probably the best one he can come up with. Well, I did that. I've got 3 of those. That's one small problem. These cost about 15 quid each. So you got £45 worth of toroid before you even start. And it's heavy as well. So unless you are desperate to play with it and see what a Type 52 toroid is like, a Type 43 toroid, an FT240-43, is going to do the job more than good enough. So that's, as I said, my end-fed half-wave with a 240-43 in it.
So that's a multi-band.
Yeah, this is a multi-band matching unit. Yeah.
And unless I missed something, Steve, can I just ask before we go on a little bit further, is that same box can do 80 meters as well as 40 in the other ones, as long as you use a double length of wire. So that it's just the box stays the same. Is that right?
Yes, the box stays the same. You can use 66 foot of wire with this for a 40, 20, 15, and 10 meter, or you can put 132 foot wire on that. It gives you 80, 40, 30, 20, 17, 15, and 10. So it's a very, 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 very versatile box of tricks. In fact, with this one, if I just put 10 meters of wire on the end of it, it'll work 20 meters. So it's a very, very versatile box of tricks. And so you only have to build one, and then you can use it however you want. It's just a case of getting the right length of wire for what you're trying to achieve. So as I said, if you look at that diagram there, if you search on the internet for this, you'll find everyone's got them. Everyone's got the same kind of design. So we have 2 bifilar turns there, which is the input. And across that, we put a high voltage capacitor, 100 picofarad capacitor, which helps with the matching. Now, how much are they? Well, they work out about £2 or £3 on eBay. So, I think you buy them in packs of 10 for about £3. So they're not too bad. But it works a treat. You just solder it across the input, and that will lower the SWR, or help to lower the SWR. So we've got 2 bifilar turns at the bottom. Then we've got another 5 turns to make 7. Then we cross over, and then we do another 7 turns up there. So we've got a total of 14 secondary turns and 2 primary turns. So that's 14 over 2. So that's 7. It's a ratio of 7. But the impedance matching goes as the square of the turns ratio. So that's 7 squared is 49. So that's where the 49-to-1 transformer comes from. So a secondary of 14 turns, a primary of 2 turns, gives us a 7-to-1 ratio. Square that, gives us 49-to-1. And that's how we build a 49-to-1 transformer. And this is what it looks like pretty much. Although anyone who's doing the sums on this will see this is a 64-to-1 transformer. This is something I was playing with. At first, there was a lot of debate as to whether you wanted a 49 or a 64-to-1 transformer. I've generally found 49-to-1 is fine. I haven't felt the need to go much more, but certainly there's a lot of room for experimentation here. But this was a 64-to-1 one that I tried anyway. But you can see there you've got the 2 bifilar turns. Just twist the wire together to put the first 2 turns on. Then you continue around. In this case, I think it was 8 turns there. Then across and under, then a further 8 turns at the other side to give you a 64-to-1 transformer. And that just goes into the box, solders into the box, and there it's finished, it's built. This is a plot made with a nano VNA of a 49-to-1 box of tricks, this one here. and 132 foot of wire. So you can see here, we just go from the bottom here, we've got a low SWR below about 1.2 to 1 on 80 meters. 5 megahertz isn't quite so good, but it was never designed for 5, so that's not a problem. 7 megs is again about 1.3, 1.4 to 1. What have we got there? We've got 30 meters, 10 megs is about 1.5 to 1. 20 meters is just over 1.7 to 1. 17 meters, 1.67 to 1. 15 meters, 1.67 to 1. There we've got 12 meters, again 1.33. And then 10 meters, right the way across 10 meters, it's below about 1.5 to 1 across the band. Now, you show me a multi-band antenna with no moving parts, no traps, nothing, that will give you that kind of range of low SWR on so many different bands. You know, that's why I was saying I like the end-fed half wave if it's done properly. And this scan was taken. What this is was this antenna was my antenna, 132 foot wire, and I just connected a homemade box of tricks on the bottom of it. So this was a homemade matching unit and 132 foot of wire to get this effect. So you can see from that you really, really don't even need to bother with an ATU. If you want to work on 5 megs, yes, you do need an ATU. But I think everything else is below about 2 to 1 SWR right across the band. And I think that's the wonder of it anyway.
How critical is things like both the windings on the transformer, Steve, and also the length of that whole piece of wire? You've mentioned 66 feet or 132 feet. How critical is that?
I think the length of the wire is quite critical because it has to be a half wave at the lowest frequency of operation. So generally we talk about 132 feet of wire. Obviously, you can make it a little bit longer and fold it back on itself just to fine tune it. But yeah, if you want to build one of these as a multi-band, either 66 foot of wire or 132 foot of wire, but they are the lengths you need. If you mess around with those lengths, you're not actually using an end-fed half wave at the frequency of operation. So these are the ideal lengths. This is why I was saying that there's been so much research and work done by people like Steve Ellington and the others, that they've done all the hard work for you now. They're saying, well, this is the length you need. 100 picofarad capacitor in there makes a hell of a difference, helps with the tuning. You know, the toroid being wound like the way it is. You know, I think all the hard work's been done now.
It was just that I thought, you know, 132 feet of wire is fair length. And if you're doing it with, you know, if you're doing it for yourself or something around the garden, you just wouldn't maybe be so accurate. But what you're saying is, you know, within an inch or so of that really is quite important. Yeah. I mean, basically, this isn't just a random end-fed antenna. This is an end-fed half-wave antenna. And the fact that we're using these lengths of 66 feet and 132 feet is because it then harmonically works, you know, on the other bands. If you just stick a random length of wire up and feed it, yes, you could probably tune it to a low SWR, but you would be constantly redoing that every time you change band. Where this, I mean, I don't really need to touch the antenna tuning unit at all on these particular bands. So that's why it's an end-fed half wave, not a random length of wire at all. And that's why 132 feet or 66 feet are the prescribed lengths really for the antenna. Thank you.
Good. There's another little trick you can do with the 132 foot of wire. What you find is that if you tune it for maybe 3.6 megs, then obviously then harmonically you've got 3.6, you've got 7.2 megs, 14.4, and et cetera, et cetera. So what you find is that it can, if you got it right on one band, you may find it's a little bit out on the others. So if you, as I said, tune it for 3.6 megs, 7.2, well, that's a little bit too high. You really want to bring it down a little bit. And 14.4, now you're out of band. So this is an idea that we stole from myantennas.com, is that their antenna has a little compensation coil of about, 6 turns, I think, 6 turns of wire on a PVC pipe. And that's mounted about 78 inches from the feed point. And that just brings the SWR points down a little bit and helps with the matching. And I think it's a great idea. But again, poor old, what's his name? Mr. Horvick, Danny Horvick, had to do all this work himself to work out where you needed this coil, how many turns you need, and where do you put it to bring those SWR points down.
And just to be clear, that is still part of that 132 feet or of that wrapped around that tube, yeah?
Yeah, it's still 132 feet, and then this is added onto it. So it's not 132 feet, and then use part of that to make this coil.
Okay, right.
Yeah, just add that coil. I think the thing is, in some respects, it's better to make the antenna too long and then cut it down to get it where you want it. But this is a great way of making sure that the low SWR points end up in the right place. Otherwise, you get it tuned on maybe 3.6 megs and think, oh, that's fine, and then find it somewhere up to 29.6 or something at the other end when you want to bring it down. So the compensation coil has more effect on the higher bands than the lower bands, so that's why it's there. But it's a very, very simple, just 6 turns of wire on the former, 78 inches from the feed point. That's all you need to know. So again, so Danny Horvick did all the work, and we're going to nick his ideas, unfortunately.
Well, I'm sure he's done them and wants to share them with the community.
Well, maybe he has, because the thing about my antennas is that nobody really knows what the mix of the toroid is, and they work incredibly well, but he's never said what the mix is. So this is why people have been playing with different mixes, the Type 43, the Type 31, the Type 52, to try and replicate what he's done, and nobody's really found out yet. I'm waiting for a story to come out that says, hey, I've worked out what he's done. So whether he had the ferrites or has the ferrites made specially for him or not, we don't know. But on the whole, it works slightly better, slightly lower SWRs than FT240 43s. So but you pay for that. By the time you've imported one of these things into the UK, it's nearly £200 now. So what we're telling you, you can make one of these for, maybe £30 or so, and it'll work fine. But trying to find out exactly what he's using in terms of the toroid type, no such joy, unless we rip it apart and start doing tests on it to see. But I'm quite happy to just put it up and use it, to be honest.
Yes.
But, there we go. Okay, so another way of making a multi-band version is to use traps. I made a trapped 20, 15, and 10 meter version using coaxial traps. I'll show you the coaxial traps in a minute, and an FT240 transformer, and a 7 meter fishing pole. And I used it in the 2021 Commonwealth contest, and worked quite well. Obviously, this point of the sunspot cycle, I was mostly on 80, 40, and 20. So 15 and 10 didn't get a lot of use. So I did work some stuff on 15 and 10. But anyway, I achieved second place in the assisted category for QRP. So I was quite chuffed with that. And this is a really simple design. It only has 2 traps in it, a trap for 10 meters and a trap for 15 meters. And let's have a look at the traps. So this is what a coaxial trap looks like. And on the right there, as you can see the measurements that I ended up with. Now, again, this is one of those things where if you model this in Imanagal, like I did, you have to make some guesses. Like, you don't really know the capacitance of that trap. So you kind of guess it at maybe 100 picofarads. And then you model it and it looks really nice and all the SWRs are fine. And then you build it and find it's disastrous. In fact, when I built this, the day before the contest, I only had a low SWR on 10 megahertz. I had no low SWR anywhere else. I thought, oh God, what have I done wrong? Well, obviously, I got the lengths wrong. So basically, I ripped it all apart and then put it back together again and tuned the 10 meter version to get that right. So you put the 10 meter coax trap on and you adjust the length of that first section of wire till you get a low SWR on 10. Then you put the second section on, do the same process again for 50 meters. And then finally, you add the top section there and tune it again for 20 meters. So I ended up with SWRs of about 1.5 to 1 on 15 and 20, and about 1.8 to 1 on 10. I couldn't quite get it down on 10. I should be able to get it a little bit lower. But it's a very, very simple antenna. if you actually add those figures up there, you'll find it's about 7 meters tall. So a simple 7 meter fishing pole gives you a 3-band version, 3-band trapped end-fed half wave, and gets you on the contest bands. This was made specifically for contesting. So when there's a contest now, I can just roll this thing out and put it up in about 10 minutes, and away you go. But there are some problems with it. I'll tell you about what they are in a minute. So there is on the left-hand side, you can see one of the traps. This is another one I was playing with. This is a 17-meter trap. And how do you make these traps? Well, there's a coaxial trap design program available for download on the internet. And it was designed by Tony V6YP. And it's very, very simple. You tell it what frequency you want the trap to be resonant at. You tell it how big your form diameter is, how big your coax is, and hit the button. And or you tell it what coax it is as well. Hit the button. It will tell you how many turns you need and how long that coax has got to be to actually give you the figures that you require. So that's how coaxial traps work. What I would say is that you really, really need something like a grid dip oscillator or an attachment on an SWR meter or like an MFJ to actually work these out. If you just built it according to what he said, you'd probably find it's not right at all. So if you want to build yourself, in this case, a 17-meter trap, certainly use these as the rough guidelines, but you must use some sort of GDO or something on it to check that it is actually where you want it to be. And you can move the frequency of that trap, resonant frequency, by squeezing the turns together or moving them apart until you get the frequency that you want, and then basically wrap it up in tape or glue it to stop the coax moving. And so I've got a box of 15-meter traps, 17-meter traps, 20-meter traps, 10-meter traps, you name it, whatever it is, that I can use. Very, very simple to make, very cheap actually, because all you're using is coax and some stainless steel nuts and bolts and a bit of insulation tape. And again, this just slots over the fishing pole, and I just stop it moving with insulation tape on the pole, and away you go. So that was the 3-band multi-band or 3-band trapped end-fed half wave that I built. Does it work as well as a monoband antenna? No, it doesn't. This is the trouble. It was down about 2 S points on 20, and this got me sort of racking my brain as to why it should be. Let me just go through this first of all, though. This is a kind of a Marnagal polar diagram of the radiation pattern from an end-fed half wave on 20 meters. And you'll see that it's pretty much a DX antenna. Maximum radiation is about 20 degrees or thereabouts. So it works very, very well for DX. It's not an NVIS antenna. You'll see all this, there is nothing coming off the top of it at all. So building one of these to work people around the UK, if you could, is not going to work for you at all. It's a DX antenna, which is why I built it. You'll see it's omnidirectional. It radiates equally in all directions, or equally poorly in all directions, as Roger always used to say. And yeah, that was nice of Roger. But you see the maximum lobe there comes off at around about 20 degrees. So that's the polar pattern for one of these. So that's why I like it. But so we'll come to that one in a minute, but we'll just talk about that. But what I was going to say was that a trapped end-fed half wave for 10, 15, and 20 worked pretty well on 10, pretty well on 15, but on 20 meters, it was down about maybe 1 or 2 S points on the monoband version. And I tried to work out why. And I think I did work out why, because the maximum current point in that antenna on 20 meters is right in the middle of one of the traps. It's right in the middle of the 10-meter trap. So also, it's a lot shorter than it would be if it was a full-sized antenna. End-fed half wave for 20 meters is around about 10 meters long, but with the inductive effects of those traps, it comes out at about 7 meters. So you've got a much shorter antenna than you would normally. So I guess what I'm saying is that trapped vertical, yes, it will get you on 3 bands, and it's very simple to use, but it's not going to be as efficient as a monoband antenna. So if you want to build one, yes, go ahead. But if you want maximum performance on 20 meters, and 20-meter monoband end-fed half-wave is going to, knock spots off it, I think. So hints and tips then, now that we've kind of almost getting to the end there. There is a way of getting a 66-foot end-fed half-wave to work on 80 meters, and that's to add a coil to it. So in this case, did some calculations, and by adding 110, I said microfarad there, I didn't mean that, I meant microhenry, should change that. 110 microhenry coil, and again, you can get coil calculators on the internet. I think it's worked out about 80 odd turns of wire on a kind of PVC form of about 40 millimeters. And then if you put on another sort of 2 meters of wire on top of that, you can get it to work on 80 meters. So you can turn a 40-meter end-fed half-wave into an 80-meter antenna just with a coil and 2 meters of wire. That will bring the SWR down dramatically. How does it perform? Not brilliantly, to be honest. It's just too short. But it is a way of doing it. If you really, really are stuck for space, this is one way of doing it. And to be honest, I think there are not many 80-meter antennas that would fit in that kind of space. So, up a fishing pole about sort of 7 meters, then the rest of it going out. You could fit that into a fairly small back garden, but it will get you on 80. So it's probably best tuned up on maybe just one frequency, like the FT8 frequency or CW frequency, sort of that kind of area. It will work across the whole of 80 meters with an ATU, but if you want to tune it for the lowest SWR, it's quite sharp tuning, unfortunately. But there's no such thing as a free lunch when it comes to antenna design, I'm afraid. But there we go. As I said earlier, compensation coil. If you put a 6-turn coil 78 inches up from the feed point on the 132 feet version, that will bring the low SWR point down from about 29 megs to 28.5. So that's a very, very simple thing to add if you've got the longer antenna, just to bring the lowest SWR down points right the way down into the band. So that works quite well. And I said for QRP, an FT140 is fine. An FT240 gives you more inductance and better performance on 80 meters. Again, a lot of QRP people prefer to use the smaller, light toroids, but I think you're doing yourself a bit of an injustice, really. I think you're better off with one of the Meteor FT240-43s, and that will probably give you better performance on 80 meters. And should you want to use it with 100 watts, you'll find that it will work much better than an FT140. FT140 will take 100 watts, but not going to be that happy with doing it for that long. An FT240 will probably do it all day, every day. Hints and tips number 2. You can make a multi-band end-fed half-wave by using a camping washing line spool. Now, I gave this talk to the GQRP Club a couple of weeks ago, and somebody said, hey, they sell these in millets. I didn't know that because I ordered mine from the States. But we've used one of these as well at Caister when we suddenly decided we needed to put up a 30-meter end-fed half-wave. So it's just a camping spool that you normally put your washing out on, but I took all the string out of it and wound some wire in it, and I used a Sharpie to mark half-wave lengths for 10, 12, 15, 17, 20, 30, and 40 meters. So basically spool it out to whatever length you need, tie it off, and there you go. You've got it. And
does the extra wire not have some effect, though, on the resonance of it, then? Is the bit that's left coiled up just left? You would think,
wouldn't you?
Yeah, well, I know a lot less than you, of course, Steve, but in my head, it would still be that long, the piece of wire.
You would think, but it actually kind of works as a coil. So it's it kind of cuts it off, if you like. It's like a choke. So I've never had a problem with it. So I built one of these and spooled it out, got the low SWR marked with a Sharpie. So you can just put it whatever length you want. You just wind it out to the length you require, and away you go. I've never found it's a problem. And I think it's because the wire that's in the the handle, if you like, the spool, acts as a kind of a rather large choke, so it doesn't actually add anything. Or you can think of it as kind of end-fed loading, which is never terribly efficient in the first place. But trust me, if you build one of these, you spool out the length you want, and away you go. So, Caser, a couple of years ago, we suddenly decided that the bands were really rotten, and we needed a 30-meter antenna. And so we spooled out 30 meters. You know, it was marked on the spool, connect it all up, had a low SWR, and had a load of fun on 30 meters at CW. I think we were working stations, you know, one after the other all afternoon, and this thing, you know, took about 10 minutes to make. So it's worth having. It's the sort of thing you want to have in your arsenal of antennas, because it's just so simple. But there we go. Right.
And that was we did just lose it, and it's not your fault. We lost a bit of internet, I think, at that moment. It could have come over as Miller's, but I'm guessing you were saying Millets. Yes, Millets, the sort of camping shop type place.
Yeah, I had a notice come up saying, "Oh, your internet connection is unstable." It was only there for a couple of seconds. So
it just happened to be then, though, Steve.
Yeah, it would, wouldn't it? Yeah,
okay.
Millets.
Right.
Yeah, but if not, on eBay, you can search around and you can get these off eBay for about £5 each. I ordered about 3 from the States, and you know, they didn't cost that much to get over here. But they're very, very simple things. But yeah, certainly check out the UK as well. Millets probably, or eBay. Just have a look.
The gauge of wire that you'd use on there to fit it.
I couldn't tell you what it is. It's what I had, so it's not terribly thick.
And it's not critical or anything.
No, it's not critical. No, in fact, the thinner it is, the better in a way. Because you can put more on the spool. I can put a 40-meter half wave on just about get it in there with that gauge of wire. But if it was much thicker, it wouldn't be able to.
Okay.
So just I think that particular wire was some that came from the SOTA guy. What's his name? Richard. Was a spool of wire I bought from him.
Yeah. Yes. I can't remember.
Yeah, Newstead. Yeah, Richard Newstead. Yes. So finally then, hints and tips number 3. Yeah, hints and tips number 3. Use stainless steel hardware on your boxes because obviously if they're going to get wet, which they do, you don't want the things going rusty. And so, I have a bag full of stainless steel nuts and bolts and things, and they never rust, they never corrode, and they work a treat. So that I would definitely say that is definitely number 1 in terms of hints and tips. Avoid the house-type mastic that you get, because if it smells of vinegar when you use it, this one doesn't, that's because it's got acetic acid in it, and you'll find that stuff can rot and corrode all sorts of things. So it's not a good one to use. So if you're using any mastic to hold things together, avoid the stuff that smells of vinegar, because the acetic acid will actually rot your wires and rot everything as well. So be careful of that. Use nylon nuts and bolts, not screws, where possible. Internet connection just gone unstable again, so we'll just wait a second. Yeah, so use nylon locking nuts and bolts just to make sure everything's nice and tight. I find with the ground connection on these, it's very hard to make them so that they don't twist. So there we go. That's another little tip, rather. There's no need to use Teflon tubing on the wire. Some earlier videos of end-fed half waves suggesting that you have to wrap the wire around the toroid in Teflon tubing. That doesn't seem to be the case, no more than you need to wrap the toroids with PTFE tape. If you check with a multimeter, you'll find that the toroid is not a very good conductor at all. So it's not likely to arc over onto the toroid, so you don't need it. And if you use PTFE tape on the toroid, you're making the wire stand further away from the toroid, so it's not a good idea. You want the wire as close as you can get it to the toroid. So there's no need to wrap it with PTFE tape. I've made some with PTFE tape, I've made some without PTFE tape. I really can't tell the difference. And finally then, a good source of plastic boxes in the UK is Screwfix. Look for the British General IP55 weatherproof outdoor enclosure, which is only £3.79. That can take a T200 toroid, no problem at all. They're not bad little boxes, and I've got a very good gasket on them as well. This is not a terribly good one. The gasket there's a little thin one that's mounted in the lid of the box, and it looks like it could break at any minute. Where with the Screwfix box, it's a very thick gasket. You'll see it when you buy it. And that just seems to me, I mean, I've spent ages finding decent boxes, weatherproof boxes, and they either crack or, well, they generally do crack in the winter when the frost gets to them. But these seem to be, for the price, pretty good. So that's just the hints and tips there. And finally, then, some more information. If you're interested, look at Steve Ellington and for LQ's videos on YouTube. Steve is a great guy, and what he did was a series of videos that ask the sort of questions you might want to ask, like, well, how does an end-fed half-wave antenna compare with a center-fed half-wave antenna? So he did lots of comparison tests between one and the other, and found that within a degree of accuracy, there was very little difference, to be honest. And he tried different toroids, and he tried different winding with different methods and using the PTFE tape. And so he's got a whole series of videos about end-fed half-waves that prove that they work, definitely, and that, the best way to build them. Steve AA5TV's blog is still there, aa5tv.com. He's got lots of information on end-fed half-waves. The two companies at the bottom there are the two main commercial makers of end-fed half-waves. Highendcompany.nl is the Netherlands-based company that will sell you one of these ready built. And myantennas.com is Danny's website in the States. He makes and sells these and sells them all around the world. And the trouble is now, for getting anything from the States, you have to pay quite heavy postage and import duty. So my antennas, 132 foot, I think it's the 1010 model, comes in at just under £200 now, which is a lot of money. But to be honest, you can build your own and it'll work pretty much 95% of that. And also on my blog, G0KYA.blogspot.com, there's construction information on monoband and multiband EFHWs. And I think you've got the handout as well that you were talking about earlier that I put together. So really, it's been a 10-year journey of experimentation, and I like the antennas. Is it the best antenna ever made? Probably not, no. Are there better designs? Probably, but in terms of the number of bands you can get out of a single antenna without an ATU, for something that you could make in an afternoon, I think it works, and it works very, very well. So that's it, really, for the end-fed half-wave story, if you like, for monoband and multiband and trapped end-fed half-waves as well. And we'll see what the next 10 years brings in terms of designs.
Well, it's
there we go.
Certainly, thank you very much, Steve. We're grasping hold of your internet. I think it's between you and us at the moment, but anyway, so we're sorry about that. But we have got everything. Don't worry, and we got all the pictures and things fine. Just occasionally, your words were lengthened out a bit, but that's fine. Yeah, as you say, now for those of you at home who already subscribed to the Norfolk Amateur Radio Club newsletter, then you should have got at least 2 copies of these now, because on the last two newsletters that I've sent, we sent this full document. I think there must be about 8-10 pages here, and has got most of the information that you've seen tonight. So if you haven't got that though yet, if you want to subscribe, I'll be putting it again on this weekend's newsletter. So attached to it, look for the PDF that's on here. And if you haven't done that yet, if you want to do it that way, then subscribe to our newsletter. You can always unsubscribe, or if you don't want to do it that way, you can drop a line to us here at NARC Live on radio@dcpmicro.com. Just drop us a line and we will email this to you. Steve's very kindly made all this available free of charge on here. There's the whole story really from your early work, isn't there, Steve, to the actual latest version, the multiband and everything, including the details of the blocks and everything like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a long journey, but it's been worthwhile, I think. And to see other people, I think the thing is to see other people experimenting with it and saying, how about trying this? How about trying that? I think that's where amateurs really, really score. Hence, we get things like the 240-43 toroids, the 100 picofarad capacitor, which helps with the matching, like the compensation coil. This has all come out of experimentation.
The nice thing is as well, I
saves
think,
people a lot of work.
Yes, sorry. I mean, the nice thing is you've made that matching box as well, and that really then it's just down to a length of wire that you can play around with a lot, and the cost of that, isn't going to be a huge cost for some wire that you've got lying around. I mean, I found a reel of cable earlier on here, and it's brown as well, so dare I say, I don't want to steal one of your book titles, but the stealth antenna you talk about, if you do it in a nice green or a brown, you might even be able to disguise this as a sort of washing line or something that goes across the garden. So it's ideal. And a little tip as well, in preparation for me hopefully making one of these very soon as well, I did find a good source of this, and I'm pretty sure that radio spares or RS components still supplied the general public, and I bought one of these a few days ago and it arrived today and it was £7.72 including VAT. I've got a trade account with them, so it didn't cost anything for delivery. I'm not quite sure. I think if you order for yourself, you might have to add a few pounds for that. But if you want to, this is the 243. Just to show you as well, Steve talked about the original T200. That's the red one. You can see it's a little bit bigger. Can you still fit this 243 in that screw fix box, Steve, that you talked about?
I think so. Yeah, I think what have I got here? I'm trying to find my ruler. Hang on.
That's okay. Sorry.
That's all right. You got me.
All right. Well, while you're doing that as well, Sunny M0SYW has kindly put on the part number from Screwfix, where you can buy this British General box, and it's part number 33991. 33991. That's the box that's on Screwfix, and there are other places. I saw that John had put on that you can also buy it from Amazon as well, although it's about £6.50 or so, I think.
I think John was actually probably talking about the washing line.
Oh, was he? Oh, I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. Yeah,
these
I haven't looked for a while. Yeah.
Fine, that's good. We've got some questions for you, by the way, Steve.
Okay.
Several. But also, this is a reminder to everybody at home now. Steve's formal sort of talk now is finished, but if you want to ask a question or a comment for Steve about these antennas, this is a good time to do it, either on BATC or on Facebook, and we'll read those questions to Steve. So let's start with the first question that came in, which was from David M0KYA. He said, "Hi Steve, is the effect of height above the ground of horizontal end-fed half waves the same as centre-fed dipoles?"
Yeah, basically it is. I mean, think of the antenna as a dipole, if you like. It's just where you're feeding it. So you get the same net effect with an end-fed half wave that you would get with a centre-fed dipole. So yes, height above ground can be critical. The higher the better on the whole for 20 meters and above. So definitely. So yeah, as I said, don't think of it as anything special. Just think of it as a dipole that you're feeding at one end rather than the middle, but the rest of the physics remains the same.
Okay, thank you. Now over on Facebook, Paul Gunther has put, Steve, is it advisable to use a counterpoise, or can you get away with a good earth stake without a counterpoise?
Oh, it's a good question. Depends how much power you're running, for starters. If you're running 400 watts upwards, then it's probably a good idea to have an earth stake. I've always run these caster with an earth stake at the feed point, just to make sure that we don't get any stray RF. If you've got a fair coax run and it's laying on the ground, you probably can get away with that, to be honest, because it kind of earths the currents, the common mode current that's on the coax, onto the earth. I think when we built these originally, we had one person who had terrible RF problems, and I said, well, tell me how is it set up? And it turns out that he was feeding it, and it was about 3 feet away from the rig, and up in the air. So I said, well, yeah, that's why. So either you can put a counterpoise on it, yes, definitely, or you can use an earth stake, or you can use ferrites. If you put the ferrites on sort of, they always say 0.05 wavelengths away from the feed point, but if you could put that ferrites on the coax, that will do the same thing. It's not a massive problem, but there are some residual currents, common mode currents, and that's the way to get rid of them anyway. There's ongoing debates about whether you need an earth or not on an end-fed half wave. Technically, you don't, but you don't need much of one anyway. So I would probably earth it at the feed point. It's probably a good thing to do anyway.
All right, thank you. Next question from Nev M0NFY over on BATC. Says, hi Steve, I see this 7-to-1 turns ratio on the toroid, but can you explain why you do 7 turns in one direction and then 7 in the other? How is that different to just doing 14 turns?
Okay, if I can show you this now. The best explanation I've come up with that is doing it like this. You end up with the top diametrically opposite to the feed point, if you see what I mean. So here's the feed point, and now you're coming off here. So in other words, if you did 14 turns around, it would be going round, about here. So it'd actually be very, very close to where it started again. So by doing this, you get the minimum interaction between the output of the toroid and the input of the toroid. So that seems to be why that's done like that. But try it and see. But I think Steve Ellington has said that he's found this to be the most efficient way of doing it. So I can't argue with him, to be honest. But I think that is why, because it basically puts the output diametrically opposite to the input, and so you get maximum separation from the two, which helps with the matching.
Yeah, and actually John G0KYA has also put a reply, and he agrees with you, Steve, because he said, Nev, 7 + 7 turns keeps input to output intercapacitance to a minimum, so the input and output are not next to each other.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Couldn't put it better myself.
All right. As I said, Sonny has already put the part number of that Screwfix box 33991. Sounds like a shopping channel at the moment, but anyway. So hopefully that helps you find those boxes. You say they're a lot cheaper than the ones we used originally, which I think came from Rapid Electronics, made by Hammond Electronics, I believe. Yeah. But you said that they do eventually crack because they're probably not meant for being outside for long term.
Yeah, I think the ones I've recommended here, the IP55 ones, are made for outdoor use, and they're quite chunky as well, so they're not flimsy, and so they don't give way quite so easily. I only know about them because it's a commercial company was actually using a box and sent me one to look at, and I was quite impressed with it. And I was searching on the internet trying to find out where this box was from, and then found out that was from Screwfix. So I was able to work out which box it was. So that's how I knew.
By coincidence, this last week, I bought something by British General. It's often called BG, as the actual logo is BG. Yeah. So if you find a box like that, I'm sure other people, other suppliers also sell them. David Cook has said, I've made and used a end-fed half-wave based on the VK4YE design. It's a total of 23 metres long, including the loading coil for 80 metres. And he says it covers 80, 40, 20, 15 and 10 metres, adding 17 using the ATU. Fantastic antenna, very pleased with the results. So that's David M7BLX. So
that's the 66-foot antenna with the 110 microhenry loading coil to give you 80 metres. So he's pleased with it, so that's good.
Yeah, and notice as well, David is an M7. I was going to say to you that one of the nice things about this project as well, that it really is pretty much everybody, I think, could make one of these. And if you have just starting in the hobby and you may be only just starting to solder things, there's very little, well, there's no real precision soldering needed for this or anything, is there? So it really is something for almost everybody, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
One other question, by the way, so if you have got another question for Steve or a comment, get that in right now, because otherwise we're coming to the end of the show in shortly. We've got Tom Miller says, suggestion for a future talk, build an all-band ATU. So a random end-fed wire antenna can be used to work 160 metres to 10 metres, or 5 metres in his case, he says. Well, Tom, that's a good suggestion. But I have to say to you, if you're able to do a talk like that, a very genuine suggestion, if you can, then talk to us, because we'll happily help you with that. Or if you've seen another talk online, or you know somebody who could give a talk like this, let us know where you've seen it and everything else, because this is the sort of thing we're after. I have now for the last few weeks mentioned that NARC Live is going to continue like this, probably realistically through till at least the spring. But one of the problems that we have is that every week we need to come up with a different subject, unlike when we meet physically, when we have every other one roughly is a social, informal or something like that. So coming up with these, and Roger G0KYA of course comes up with some of these talks, and Tammy and I do the other ones, but it is quite a pressure, being frank with you all. So we do need suggestions like that. It's a great suggestion for it, but we will need some help in terms of finding some of the speakers and things like that. So if you have seen a talk online or anything that you think would be of interest to us, please let us know, because we'd love to share that. Nigel 20NLK says, "Hi Steve, does it matter what gauge wire you use when winding the toroid?"
Yes and no. You notice I didn't say anything about the wire gauge that you need. Basically, if you use wire that's too thick, it's really, really, really hard to wind it around the toroid. Likewise, if you use wire that's very, very thin, it's maybe easy to wind around the toroid, but it won't be able to handle the power that you require. So I think these were 14 SWG, I think, maybe a little bit more. But I remember I did buy some wire, and it was so heavy you couldn't actually get it around the toroid. It was too hard to actually twist around it. So I haven't used a figure because I can't remember exactly what this was. I've got a figure of either 12 or 14 SWG was mentioned. But that's what you need to find, is a wire that is easy to wrap around the toroid, but not so thin as to be so easy that it can't handle the power. Having said that, I've never melted one, but it depends how much power you put into it. So yeah, not a terribly helpful answer, I don't think. But
well, that's okay. It's all part of the experimentation, Steve, that we've talked about with this. Another quick question's come in now from Paul Gunther. Is there a minimum or maximum length of coax you can use? And does the length help with RF getting back into the radio? I guess the coax is the bit that, I don't know if you're talking about the capacitor bit there, or whether we're talking about the feed to the radio.
I think he's talking about the feed to the radio. I mean, generally, no, there is no limit, but you've got coax losses, so you want to keep that. You want to keep it to a minimum length, but then again, you want it to be a reasonable length to keep the feed point away from the shack. So, 10 meters or 20 meters of coax is enough, more than enough to move the feed point away. Obviously, the further the feed point away from the house, then your noise levels are going to go down. So it's quite helpful. And also, it's then radiating out into free space, and so you won't get any RFI problems. So generally, I probably use about 15 to 20 meters of coax, but that kind of suits my garden style, if you like. If you're going to use maybe 3 meters of coax, you've got real problems then, because now you're radiating right next to yourself and the rig, so that could cause issues. So look to maybe use 10, 15, 20 meters of coax just to move that feed point away from the shack as far as you possibly can. That will keep your noise levels down. It will keep the RF out of the shack as well. And if you can put ferrite on the coax as well to cut back on common mode currents, that will help a lot, I think.
And I guess being an end-fed, you could even, it's a bit extreme, but you could run the coax to the end and run the end-fed furthest away from your shack rather than nearest it, if you've got a long, thin garden or something like that.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, you could. I don't know whether that works, though. Yeah, you'll be using a long length of coax to get it to the other end to come back again.
And then you might do something, yeah.
Well, right, so you've got losses in the coax then.
Yes, it's all about experimentation, as you said.
Yeah.
One question's just come in quickly from David M7BLX. End-fed half-wave antenna doesn't appear in the EMF calculation spreadsheet drop-down option that he could see. I guess we're talking about the ICNA new regulations now that are coming in. Presume it would be wrong to select the long wire, he said.
It wouldn't be wrong to select the long wire, but generally long wires are fed from the ATU at the shack position. You're probably better off thinking of the antenna as a half wave that is fed in the middle to actually then work out your calculations. It's tricky. I mean, I've done ignert calculations from me, and I know that I need to be 3.4 meters away from the feed point. So that's sorted out. We've done that now. But if you think about an end-fed wire, generally they're fed from the ATU at the operating position. So you're very, very close to maximum current. Not good. So I generally think of the antenna as a half-wave dipole, if you like, and see what the figures come out as. Yeah, it's a shame they're not built into the RSGB spreadsheet yet.
I'm sure, exactly, Steve. I think that's the thing, that if any of you have seen any of the talks from John Rogers or any of his colleagues, you'll know that they're it's a team of volunteers building up this spreadsheet. So they're looking for help from other people as well. So if you happen to have modelled one of these and put them into that, then do get in touch with the team at the RSGB, and they'll probably put something like this in there then as well. But I'm sure, again, I can't remember the exact date. I know it though isn't the November deadline, because that's for the VHF and up, isn't it? I think you've got at least another 6 months or so before you have to put the HF antennas in for that, and I imagine by then something like this will be already in there.
Yeah, treat the end-fed half wave as a dipole, and do your calculations like that. The fact you're feeding it at one end rather than the center is kind of neither here nor there. The radiation pattern will be the same. It's just where you're feeding it. But as I said, if you treat it as an end-fed long wire, they probably think you're feeding it from the ATU, and so you've got a higher RF field around where the wire enters the ATU, which you don't have with this because you're feeding it remotely from somewhere else.
Sure.
So yeah, tricky. Not an easy one to work out.
All right. Well, Steve, thank you ever so much for tonight's talk. A reminder again to everybody that all the information that you need to be able to make one of these is in this document, which is Steve has prepared and we've put already on the newsletters. If you haven't had it, you can either drop us an email to the usual address and we will email it to you, or if you subscribe to the Norfolk Amateur Radio Club newsletter in the next couple of days, then this weekend you'll get that copy as well. It's a PDF that's attached to the newsletter. I did it for last weekend and I'll be doing it again for this weekend. But Steve G0KYA, thank you ever so much for this presentation. I really do hope, genuinely, that if people don't build anything else, I'm sure they can build antennas, and one like this, which is just based on wire, not lots of big expensive bits of aluminium, is a wonderful opportunity. So thank you for that, and thanks for the inspiration for everybody as well.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. There we are. That's almost it for the programme, but there is one little thing sort of associated with this really that I'd like to mention. In a couple of weeks' time, we're going to start a new series for NARC Live, something that we hope to do roughly once a month, to talking about various aspects of the shack. We're calling it In the Shack, and we're looking at various aspects of radio stations for the months to come. And the first one we're going to start with is antenna, in fact HF antenna. And what we'd like is that those of you who've got HF antenna, there's lots of you I know, we'd like you to share that experience with us by sending us the photographs and maybe a few words on it, or even better, join us on the night, because it'll be one of those interactive sessions as well. Maybe you're going to be getting around to making one of these antennas yourself, the end-fed half-wave tonight, and share that with us as well. The idea is that we're going to share the knowledge of some members that have had with antennas, in this case, with everybody else, and that we'll all hopefully be able to try something new. We'll be looking at other aspects of the shack. We'll be looking at the radios themselves, different modes, different things you can do, whether it's television, whether it's CW, whether it's contesting, whatever. Over the next few months, we'll be looking at all these different things, but we're going to start with antennas, and HF antennas in particular. We'd love you to share your experience. So start thinking, please, about taking some pictures of your antennas and maybe telling us why they're so good, why you like them, if you made them yourself, how you made them, all that sort of thing. And it'll be a great interactive evening. We'll be able to start sharing with each other experiences of our antennas in the shack. That's coming in a couple of weeks' time, but start thinking about it now. But that's about it for tonight's NARC Live. Just to remind you again what's happening at the club this week. We've got the GB Tourist News on Sunday at 7 o'clock. On Monday, the 4th of October, Ken M0KJW hosts the Monday Night Net, the CW Net at 8:30. And on Wednesday, the 6th of October, here on NARC Live, we've got Paul Money with Why Are There No Green Stars? And I should mention, by the way, because this is Paul's living, he's a professional broadcaster and presenter, we will not be putting his talk up onto the YouTube channel as we usually do for our talk. So if you want to see Paul's talk, you need to watch it live. It will be just as we are now on BATC or on Facebook. And that's coming up next Wednesday, 7:30 for NARC Live. And don't forget to keep sending us your stories and your pictures and everything else to keep us in touch. But that's about it, I think, Tammy?
Yep, I think so.
So really good to see you, and we'll see you again next week for NARC Live. So for now, from Tammy M0TC.
Goodbye.
And from me, David G7URP. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.